We are live. Let's talk about what flex is. So flex is another way to make things side by side. So let's say I have a box, right? Let's say I have a box here. I'm gonna call it div.row. You can name it anything you want. If I do div.row, it's gonna create a div with the class name of row. It's okay if I use class or ID right now, it doesn't matter too much. But I'm creating a div and I'm giving it a name called row. Especially if I want to reuse the code for this particular styling. But it's just a div, and by default, we're not going to see a div. By default, we're not going to see this div because it has no height and it's transparent. So I'm going to select that div called row. In order to select something that has a class name, I need a dot row. And let's say I give it a height of 250 pixels. Okay, and just because I gave it a height doesn't mean I'm going to see it because it's transparent. So I could give it a border. Oh, and by the way, if something better than border, if you wanted to just like have a visualization of where the boundaries of something is, if you add border, it actually makes something bigger, right? Or it actually adjusts the spacing because it adds to the spacing of something. But outline will allow you to see the border without adding extra space to your stuff. So I could do outline 1 pixel, solid, black for now. Save it, and then let's see. Cool, there's our div, right? It goes the full width of our screen. And if I wanted this to be in a certain width, I could click on this toggle device toolbar, and I can say, you know what? I'm gonna make my app work for 1500 pixels. If it's anything more, it might not look as pretty. If it's anything less, it might not look as pretty. But if it works for 1500 pixels, I'm good. I could do that. I could choose that. And you can choose what you want right here. Whatever is comfortable for you. We're not doing responsive design yet where it works on every single width. I'm gonna give you guys a lecture on that next week after your exam. Your exam is not gonna be requiring you to have it work on all widths. Okay, so let's just say I do 1500 for now. Okay. So here's my div, and inside of this div, I can put some boxes in. Okay, so matter of fact, let me also give this div a background color. Background color of coral. Okay, so now it's coral. Okay, in this box, I can put some boxes in. And yesterday, what we learned was, let's call it box, div.box. Now it's going to create a div called box. And let me just go ahead and style it here. .box. Let's give it a height that is smaller than its container so that it can fit inside of it. Let's do 200 pixels. And then background color, aqua. Okay. So I have a box that is 200 pixels in height that is inside of a box that is 250 pixels in height. Okay. Let me make this box less wide though, this aqua box. So let's give it a width. Let's just make it a square. Okay. Cool. Now I have a square box inside of this rectangular box, right? I got the square box inside of the rectangular box. And then I can repeat that code if I want 3 boxes. So now I see 3 boxes here. 1, 2. It's kind of hard to see the 3 boxes because they don't have any outlines to show where the box ends. So it's just one box stacked on top of another. It looks like one long box. So what can I do to see the boundaries of it? Outline. Yeah, perfect. Outline. Let's do red, a different color. Okay. So red. Okay, I see these 3 boxes stacked on top of one another. So what did we do yesterday to make them so that they can be side by side?
Align.
display inline block, right? So I said display inline block. Okay, now they're side by side, but notice there's some space right here in between each box. Now you may think that that's margin, but we said for everything there's going to be 0 margin right now. So there shouldn't be any margin. And I can even double check its margin by clicking on this selector tool and then clicking on the box, and I'll see the style for it. And I can look at the box model here. It has no margin, 0 margin, right? But I still see some space, because when you do display inline block, it will actually care about the white space in your HTML file. So in order to get rid of these little gaps right here, I would actually have to get rid of those spaces here, and then get rid of those spaces here. Okay, and then that not work? Or that not work? Okay. Oh yeah, it does work. We have a red outline in the box. That's why it looks like there's still margin. Hold on. Let me get rid of let me make it a black outline. Okay. But now those spaces are gone. Now the boxes are touching one another, right? But as soon as but what's the problem with this though? We had an assignment that told us, yeah, it's ugly, right? We don't see the parent-child relationships, but I want to be able to follow my indentation rules. I want to be able to follow my indentation rules and then have it look like this. But if I do that, now the problem is there's some extra space here. That's the problem with display inline block. Okay. And also, if I want them spread out, like let's say I wanted these 3 boxes spread out over this div, I would have to calculate the margin that they need in order to spread out together. So I would have to say, okay, for each box, let's say margin right, 100 pixels. And then I'll have to check, is that far enough? No, okay, let's do, margin right, 300 pixels, right? I'd have to keep doing that, like, okay, 400 pixels. Is that good enough? Okay, that's too much, okay. And I have to keep doing that, like 300 pixels, is that better? Is that not working? 300 pixels, it's still not, because it's still not enough, because there's 300 pixels here, but then this box has a 300 pixel margin, right? It was too much moves to do simple things. So there's something better. There's something called display flex. What we can do with display flex is, let's get rid of this margin and display inline block. And then we'll see back to here. Okay, we're back to this point. Let me just move this. Yeah. Okay. So any questions so far before I introduce display flex? No? Okay. Let me know if there's anything. Okay, so we have these boxes stacked on top of one another. There's no more display inline block. And the problem with display inline block is it cares about this white space, and you'd have to get rid of it by making your code look ugly in order for it to, not have that extra space. And also, it's hard to kind of arrange how those boxes lay out. You have to like add margin and keep checking. Did anybody have to do that assignment yesterday? And you kept like doing pixel by pixel checking to make it perfect? Was that annoying? Okay, cool. Display flex, you could use padding too, yeah. But yeah, it was kind of annoying, right? And then you'd have to just keep switching, and then it's not exactly, and then if it's too much, it'll like go to the next line, it'll break, right? And then if you switch your screen width, all of a sudden everything breaks again. Well, let's talk about something better, something called display flex, which is here. Matter of fact, should I just have this in? Yeah, this one. Display flex. So this tab, I'm gonna put it here. So display flex is something that we can use to make things side by side. But we're not going to do it on the child containers, because remember, if I want these 3 boxes to be side by side, I had to tell these 3 boxes to be display inline block. But since they have a class name for box, then I can say display inline block right here. And then all 3 of these boxes will be inline block. But for display flex, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to ask yourself, what things need to be side by side? These 3 things need to be side by side. Okay, so then who is their parents? What is their parents? Okay, the div with the class name of row. So we need to identify the parents, and this is going to be called the flex container. So if I want everything inside of this parent to be side by side, I can tell it that. I can target the parents, which is the row, which in this case is this orangey box. I can tell the parents to allow all of its children to be side by side. So I'm going to target the parents to do that. So I'm going to target the row, and I'm going to say display flex. If I save that, and if I press tab, now they're side by side, no white space, or no extra space because of the space on my, because of this space isn't going to affect my code. And I got these boxes side by side, and there's some cool ways for me to determine how I want them to lay out. I could still do the margin like you did yesterday if I wanted to. I could still say margin for each of these smaller boxes, right? I can still give these small boxes, these square boxes, a margin. Now, let's talk about the terminology. This is called the flex container. Basically, the container that has its children that are going to be side by side. So, and then these are like the flex items. So the items that are going to be side by side. So these blue boxes are flex items. The orange box is the flex container. Okay. So we could say we could still give it a margin. Margin right, 180 pixels. You can still do that. But you're still gonna have to work with how to spread them out. Like, let's say I know I want them to be as far apart from each other as possible, as spread out as possible. There's a shorter way to do that now. Instead of calculating the margin to try to make them as spread out as possible, I can get rid of that. So this is, if I want to horizontally space them in a certain way, it's called justify content. So justify content is to horizontally space things apart. And you have a couple options. If I do center, it'll make them all centered on their flex container. So the blue boxes are the flex items, and the orange box is the flex container, right? So to the flex container, which is the row, the orange box, I'm going to tell it display flex, meaning all of its children are going to be side by side. And then justify content center will make all of its children side by side, but centered inside of the container. So inside of the row, which is the orange box, the blue boxes will be centered. That's one thing that you could do, right? Imagine having to adjust the margin left and margin right of just this box. And in order to achieve the same effect using display inline block, you'd have to target this box on the left and give it a margin left here. And you have to target this box on the right and give it a margin right so that they would kind of squeeze in, and you have to calculate it perfectly. Would you rather do that or just say justify content center? Right now, you're not spending 20 minutes trying to figure out margins to make it exact, move it to the right place. Another thing you can do, let's say I want them spread out. There is, let's look at all the options. So there's justify content, there's justify content center, there's justify content end, right? This will make it so that all the flex items are at the end of their flex container. Okay. The default is actually start. Justify content start. So they'll just start at the beginning of the flex container. So each of the flex items, which are the blue boxes, starts at the beginning of the flex container. But if I don't specify it, that's the default. So it's going to do that anyways. There's also a space between. So there's a space between. That makes it so that they can go as far away from each other as possible. Is there a difference between flex end and end? I think it's the same thing. So flex end, I'll take it there, and then end. Oh, wait, I didn't say it yet. End will also do the same thing. I don't see any difference off the top of my head, but maybe there's some nuances that I can look up the documentation for. But for now, I don't see anything crazy with it. So okay, so there's space between to make things as far away from each other as possible. So space between. So, and this box has no padding. So like this orange box has no padding. So these blue boxes can touch the edge of the inside edge of the orange box if they want to. Right? So there's space around as far apart as possible. Now check this out. If I move my screen resolution, I mean, not resolution, but yeah, the screen width, it's very flexible. It's actually responsive in its own way, right? Now, I still wouldn't call this like the main part of responsive design, and don't worry too much about it, but yeah. So cool. What if we only wanted to move 2 of them and then leave 1? Yeah, you'd probably need to identify the one that you wanted to do. Yeah, we're not there yet though. Okay, so there's space between. There's also space around, which means that they'll have even space on both. Each of the flex items, which are the blue boxes, will have even spaces on their left side and the right side being respected, right? And here you see this much space. Let's say this is like, I don't know, 100 pixels or something. And here up to here, right here is 100 pixels on the right side of this box. And then for here to the left side of this box is 100 pixels. So it looks a little bit wider here. A little bit wider here, but that's spaced evenly. Or not spaced evenly, spaced around, and spaced evenly. It's pretty similar. But now it's exactly even spaces between the left and right side.
When it does that mean, because I looked in the inspector and I didn't see like margin or anything like that. So what is it? Is it not doing like a secret margin or anything like that? Is it just moving them?
This is moving them, yeah. Let's take a look. So I see you already inspecting. Okay, I see. Yeah, I like that. Curiosity is great. That's how you learn. So yeah, it's not adding any margin to these boxes. Let me go ahead and make sure I click on this. And there's no margin being added, but it just aligns them in that way. That's the magic of Flex.
So, and sorry for the question again. Does that mean I can add margin to it?
Yeah, you can add margin. So let's say I want this first box, even though they're all spaced evenly, I want this box to have a little bit more margin on its right side. Just this one box though. How can I do that? How can I just select this one box? Can I identify it? Give it an ID.
So we change the, yeah.
And let's call this box 1. And I'll say hashtag to identify an ID, box 1. Margin right, let's say 10 pixels. Well, 10 is not big enough because it's already got 10 pixels. But let's say I make it like a 300 pixels, right? Because it already has at least 10 pixels space here, so we're not going to see that. So let's say I made it like 300 pixels. So now this box is a little bit more special when it comes to margin, a little bit more space. So you can still use margin as you need it now, but you don't need to use it as much as you needed before. But it's still useful to use margin when you need it. Classes for multiple items and IDs for individual, correct? Correct, Connor, correct. Because let's say I wanted those 3 boxes to all be square and blue. So I gave them a class of box and I styled that to be square and blue. But then this first box, I wanted to have a little bit more unique style. So I also gave it an ID and I said, hey, this first box is also going to have an extra margin right. It's going to be a little bit more margin on this right side. So there's a little bit more extra margin there. What would happen if you gave multiple items the same ID on accident? It'll still work. This is not best practice. It'll still apply that style, though. So if I said ID is equal to box 1, now this box also has that extra space. Or yeah. If I gave it here, now the last box is going to have that extra space. So it would still work, but it's not valid. Like, it's not best practice.
Could the container restrict anything like that of those boxes, or because I'm identifying the boxes individually, the container won't like restrict or override it?
The container restricts. You mean like
because like we gave the container like justify the content that's in there, so space evenly, but like we're still able to, add margin to it. So does that mean like the container isn't gonna like stop me from doing anything within it?
Exactly. The container is probably going to get you like set up to where you want it at first, and then you can use margin to get it more exact. Because then if I wanted to space even, like let's say I wanted them centered, right? And let me just get rid of this margin, right? I wanted them centered, but I wanted it there, but I didn't want it, exactly like this, but I wanted it, I wanted to start from here, but then for this first box, maybe for each box, I wanted to give them a little bit of margin. So now they're not exactly centered. So I can just say for all the boxes, maybe I can give, if you wanted to target all the boxes, you could give a margin right, 10 pixels. That's one way to do it. And now they're still centered, but now I'm starting from a certain reference point of being centered, and then I can add margin to move them around from there. It's kind of like from here, we're going to move you around rather than, so at least you set them up in the right spot first so that you have to use as little margin as possible to get it where you want it. Does that make sense, Spencer? Yeah, okay, cool. But there's a better property in Flex to space things around. On the parent container, so the parent container is the row, I can actually tell it how much margin all of its children might have. And it's kind of like a margin. It's called gap. And I can say 10 pixels. And now it'll apply a gap to all of its children, 10 pixels in between. That's something you can do. Cool. So yeah, and let's check this out. If I added more divs, right, what would happen? It just automatically just gets added and put in the right place. They said that's so OP. I say OP a lot, so that's funny. Right, and if I keep doing that, well, even they're trying to be centered, but the box is only so big, it doesn't look centered. But yeah, I can keep adding boxes, and if I keep adding boxes, I can keep doing that. But then it's gonna just squeeze these boxes smaller and smaller to fit everything in. Let's just leave it at 3 boxes now. So basically, main takeaway from this is if you want things to be side by side, give them a parent, make sure they have a parent, and make that parent display flex. So I wanted these 3 boxes to be side by side, then give them a parent. Okay, here's a parent. And then target that parent in the CSS to be display flex, and that'll make it side by side. And then you can use justify content to just determine how you want them side by side. You want them side by side in the center. You want them side by side spaced as far apart as possible. You want them side by side with even spacing in between them. Right? And you can also change the flex direction too. So by default, the flex direction is gonna make them side by side. But if you want it to be a column, you could say flex direction column. I can say flex column. And now it makes it one on top of another. If you want to do that, you can. But we're not gonna take a look at that today. We're just gonna work with the row. And by default, the flex direction is already row. So if I type in row here, that's the same thing as just me not having typed this at all. But by default, it will be row. And now let's take a look here. Notice they're all at the top though. I can also determine how I want them vertically. And Luke, yeah, that would make sense to say vertical align, right? That's the most intuitive, logical, sound way to say it. But really, it's going to be called align items. Align items means up and down. If the flex direction is row, then align items means to align them up and down. So justify content is to determine how the children of this row are going to be spaced out horizontally. And then align items, if I do center, now they're vertically inside of the flex container. How can they align themselves vertically? So there's center, right? And then you can also say align items, you could do top. I think that's the default. That's the default because that's what we had without typing anything. And then bottom, it's not bottom. Align items, flex end is to get, yeah, there's no top actually. Top didn't work. Top is not the right thing. It's flex start and flex end. So flex start is going to be at the top. Flex end is going to be at the bottom. Top still works because my code didn't work. So by default, it goes to the top anyways. Yeah, just flex end and then flex start is going to give us the top. And if I didn't have any code here, by default, it's going to be flex start. Okay. Cool. Any questions on flex? We have time. We're almost done, so.
If you wanted to, I mean, so we can go to the top, the center, and the bottom, but let's say you wanted to go to like not to the very bottom, but just right above it. Would you just use margin or how do you do that?
Yeah, so let's say I have this row is like really big, right? Let's say it's like 500 pixels so that we can really see, you know. So now we have some more space to navigate. But if I do flex start, it'll be all the way at the top. If I do flex, if I do for align items, if I do center, it'll be exactly at the center, right? And if I do flex end, it'll be exactly at the end. Now it depends on your wireframe. If your customer or the company that you're working at says, hey, it doesn't need to be all the way at the bottom. It needs to be just towards the bottom. Then I'll probably start off with flex end and then give what? What do you think I could do to push these up? I can give them a, Yeah, I can give this box of padding, this orange box of padding on the bottom. Or I could give the blue box a bottom margin. Two options. You could do margin bottom on the blue box, like Steve said. Yep, correct, Steve. Or you could do padding on the bottom of the orange box, like Spencer said, right? So, but notice how I'm trying to get it towards where I want it first using the justify content and align items. And then anything more specific, if it's not going to be exactly at the end, but towards the end, I'm going to say, hey, flex end first, and then I can just add a little bit of margin. So now I don't have to add too much margin, right? So I could say for the box, for these 3 boxes, I could do a margin bottom. I don't know, 20 pixels. And now they're not completely at the bottom, they're just towards the bottom. Great question. Another question? Any other questions? Is parent padding or child margin better practice for this sort of thing? Great question, Luke. So if I have, let's say I have other elements inside of this orange box that depends. So if I have other elements inside of this orange box that also need to have that same amount of space away from the edge, like if everything needs to be spaced away from the edge, then I think padding would be the better option. But if only these 3 boxes need to be away from the edge, but let's say I have another box here that's a little bit different, that can be all the way at the bottom, right? Then, for example, let's say I add another box. Yeah, let's say box 1. I don't want box 1 to be all the way, I don't want box 1 to be slightly down. I want box 1 to be all the way at the bottom, right? Then I can actually say for box 1, margin bottom is going to be 0 pixels. So now if I'm ever in a situation where some things need to touch the edge, then padding might not be the best option, because then this box won't be able to touch the edge of the, because there's padding on the orange box.
Did that only work because that one has an ID? So like if you did it with the other one, it would move both?
Exactly.
Okay.
If I do it to the dot box, then all 3 of these are dot boxes because they're class box. So then it would make them all margin bottom 0. But I said for everything with the class box, give a margin bottom of 20. So all 3 of these have a margin bottom of 20. But the first one had an ID that's more stronger, right? For the ID one, I said, hey, you know what? Override that. Make it 0 pixels for box 1. So box 1 has 0 pixels of margin on the bottom. Brian has a question. To clarify, not using padding margin, using align items property. Well, yeah, you want to start with justify content to do the spacing horizontally, and align items to determine how you want them vertically. But then if it's not exactly those, like if you don't want it exactly flexed end, if you wanted to adjust it and customize it a little bit, then you can target the child elements, which are these are called the flex items, to have specific margins as you need. So you can use a combination of the align items, justify content, right, and margins and padding as you need it. Does that make sense, Brian? Okay, cool. Yeah, you got to play around with it. Okay, cool. So so that's, and here's a video, showing cool things that you can do, talking about the properties. Okay, cool. So I recommend you guys start with this assignment, GitHub, the core assignment. I want you guys to tackle your core assignment first, and I'm going to give you guys some more hints to help you complete this. We're going to work with images and Giphies as well. We're not just going to have boxes now. Okay, so let's continue on. So yeah, justify content. So okay, if I wanted these ninjas to be spread out, right? Right now they're display flex. But you can do space evenly or space around to do that. Align item center will make these ninjas at the center on the y-axis. Flex start makes all the ninjas right here. Center makes all the ninjas centered horizontally for the justify content. Justify content makes them centered on the x-axis. Align items makes them centered on the y-axis. Justify content flex end, so on the x-axis, they're all the way at the end. But align items, that's the y-axis, it's centered, so it's still centered on the y-axis. These ninjas are spread around, space between, so they're as far away from each other as possible. That's justify content, space between. Justify content space evenly, so they have even spaces between them in the edges of the boxes. Space around is they have, they have equal spacing around each side that needs to be respected. And then between two of these, that same equal spacing, it's, you double that. Because if there's, 10 pixels of space here and 10 pixels of space here, and this green ninja has 10 pixels of space here, that's 20. Okay, so let's continue on and build more from this. So let's say, let me make this box, let me make this go down. So that's just an example of flex. Okay, so if you want to center everything fully, you do justify content center and align item center. That's going to be on the x-axis and the y-axis. So you can think of this. Can't type. Okay, so let me just make this box, this row a little bit smaller, like 300 pixels. Okay, so okay, we're gonna have like a puppy show. It's gonna have a bunch of puppies. So let's find some puppies here. Puppy GIF. Okay, let's find some GIFs. I think we're gonna go with we can go with this one. Okay, so copy image address, or I could save them on my computer. Let me save them on my computer. Save image as, and I'm gonna save it in the same folder as my project. So CSS, week 1, day 4 a.m. Save.
Oh, either or would be fine, right? We don't have to. Okay.
Yeah, either or will be fine. But in your assignments, they're gonna give you images.
Okay.
To download. So you're gonna experience importing your images from your local machine.
Okay. Gotcha.
Let's find one more Giphy. That's way too cute. What? Is that even a real thing? Okay. Okay, so save image as I don't know, another one. And I'm gonna save it in week 1, day 4 a.m. Save it. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. As you can see, I have some images. This one's called 200. It's called, I don't know, rename. Can I rename this? That's my source control. Okay, 200. Let me rename the 200 one. Sleepy pup. Okay, and then this one's just called another one. Okay, so let me create another div here. Div dot row. And then I can have an image using an image tag. And then in order to import it from my local machine, I just use // and I'll see all the files and folders in my current folder. That week 1, day 4 folder. So let's do Sleepy Pup. Let's just give it a name for screen readers. Sleepy. Okay. I press tab. Okay, so as you can see, this puppy is right in the center. There's only one box. It's right in the center of this div. Let me separate these orange boxes. How can I make it so that these orange boxes can be separated away from each other? Margin, perfect, good. So I can give a margin bottom to the orange box. So on the bottom, there's every new box, there's a margin. So that class is called row. So let's just say margin bottom. Let me give it a gap. Okay, cool. So now there's some space. Okay, cool. And by default, they're justify content center and align item center for every row. So this particular row is justify content center and align item center. So let me make this one. Let's copy another image dot slash another one. Let's call this another. I don't know, you can name it anything you want. Cool. Now these images have different heights and widths, so I can make all the images the same height and width. Say img going to be height 200 pixels, width 200 pixels. Okay, so now they're like this. They're both in the center. How can I make it so that they're as far apart away from each other as possible? On the x-axis, which one is that? Justify content or align items? Okay. So on the x-axis, I want them spread apart. Perfect. Justify content is for the x-axis. Okay. So right now it's center. And okay, so I can say space between. And now they're as far apart from each other as possible. Okay. Space around. Now they have this much, like let's say this is 100 pixels of space on the left side, and then 100 pixels of space on the right side, but then that stops right here. And then this one's 100 pixels of space on its left side. That'll add up to 200 pixels right here. And then here's 100 pixels. I don't know if it's exactly 100 pixels. I'm just using 100 as a random number here. But it's a certain number of pixels here, and certain number of pixels times 2 here, and certain number of pixels here. That's space around. Space evenly is so that they have exact even space between the edges and each other. Okay, now let's say I want another, but now this is the problem though. This top box, what if I wanted this top box to still be centered, but this bottom box to not be centered? Well, yeah, I would give it an ID, exactly, because right now, oops, wrong button. Right now, they're both the class row. Both of those two row orange boxes are the same exact class name. So they have the same exact styling for justify content space evenly, align item center. Right, so I can actually give this an ID if I want to. And yeah, ID is equal to, let's call this row 1. And for maybe for row 1, I can override it and say for hashtag row. Yeah, let's say I still want it centered for all the rows. Right, let me just get rid of this real quick. So now everybody's centered. All the rows are centered. All the orange boxes have their flex items centered. But let's say, you know, and okay, so sorry, hold on, I'm losing my blah. Okay, so we have this row. They're both rows. I give them the same class name because maybe they're going to share a bunch of similar styles. Like maybe they're both going to be 300 pixels in height, those orange boxes. Maybe they're both going to be, they're all going to be displaying flex. Maybe they're all gonna be background color coral. So they're gonna have all these properties are gonna be the same for all the rows. They're all gonna have a margin bottom so that they're gonna push the next box away. So there's a lot of similarities between these two orange boxes, except the only difference I want is how they justify their content. Maybe I want this first one to be centered and then the second one to be spaced evenly. So I can actually give this second box an ID of row 1, and I can say hashtag row 1. For that, let's override the justify content to be something else. Space between. Okay. Cool. Right. So now this one still has center because this first one is just div class row. So it's going to have all this code, justify content center, align item center. But this one, it also has the class row. So it's going to have all the styling from row. But if there's any conflicting styling, like justify content, we overrode that. Instead of being center, we're saying space between. We gave it an ID. Does that make sense? Because these two containers have similar styles, but I just want one to justify content center and the other to justify content space between. Cool. Let's do another one. Let's copy this. Let me add one more image here. Okay, save image as. Running pups. Okay. So let's say I have another one. Let's call this one row 2 with the ID of row 2. And it's going to have 3 images. / running pups. So this flex container, this third row, by default, it's going to get the classes, the style from this class row. So it's going to have, you know, the orange color, height of 300, display flex, meaning its children, which are these image tags, can be side by side. Justify content center. So that's why we see that they're centered right here. Align item centered on the y-axis. That's why they're centered on the y-axis. Let's say for this one, I want them to be spaced around. How can I give this particular third box a slightly different styling? I see a question in the chat. How do you manage images of different sizes? Yeah, I had that issue too, Joshua. So I just targeted all the images and just said, hey, make them all squares. If I didn't have that, then, you know, these images came from the internet. They have different sizes. So then that could kind of mess things up a little bit here. Is there a way to downsize an image with the proper ratio? Yeah, there is. You can just adjust just one of its properties. Like if you just adjust only height, then its width will auto adjust accordingly to that ratio. But I'm just forcing it to be a square right now. Okay, so how can I make it just so that this third box has a slightly different way that it justifies content on the x-axis? ID. So I have an ID of row 2. So I can say for row 2, hashtag row 2 space. Oh no, I can't just say space even. It's justify content. Justify content space evenly. Now this one is spaced a little bit differently. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, I think that's it. Your goal right now is to, I would say, don't worry about flex your blocks yet. You can do that later. Complete the core assignment, so you're already on pace for the day. Work with these images, figure out what type of alignment they have, figure out how to get them to be different colors. Right? How do you get these boxes to have similar styles, but some styles are going to be slightly different? How do you do that? Right? Get that done. And this is your end of day goal. So if you can finish this first, you're already off to a good start. And then you can try flex our blocks. You can try yesterday's assignment. And if you ever get stuck, you know, solution video, or you can also ask us during work hours. You can ask us. And in the evening, we're going to do a nav bar. We're going to do the Netflix nav bar. So I'm going to show you guys the Netflix nav bar, which looks like, oh, where is it? I took a screenshot. I went on Netflix yesterday and I took a screenshot of the nav bar there. It was this one. Yeah, we're gonna make this today. This is straight out of Netflix. Okay. Now, that's it. Any other questions? Yes, for the code review today. Let me stop the recording here.